The God Valley incident has just begun, and I, for one, am not ready for how it's going to end. But as has been suspected for a while now, Shaki did end up getting kidnapped and used not just a native hunting contest prize, but the native hunting contest prize. And so the mystery of who the Rocks Pirates traitor is has finally been revealed. I mean, I say finally. This mystery was only set up like 2 chapters ago, but it was Ochoku. Ugh, Ochoku, the objectively most evil looking of all of the Roxes, and also suspected parent of Caribou and Corribo. But in order to get away with his Shaki disappearance plan, Ochoku needed to murder Don Marlin, which I think is a shame. I really liked his design, but I guess this explains why we've heard nothing about him in the modern day. And it's quite a brutal scene that I think Oda has designed to draw parallels to Blackbeard murdering Thatch for the Yami Yami no Mi, as Oda's even gone to the trouble of conjuring some thunderstrikes for the occasion. And after Rocks himself, the first reaction that we see is from Whitebeard. And Edward Newgate is beyond shocked that something like this could have happened even within this crew. Although sadly, we as readers know that this will not be the last time that Whitebeard is subject to a scene like this. I think these parallels being drawn by Oda to make a clear distinction between Rocks and Blackbeard. Young Marshall D. Teach, if that is indeed your real name, which it isn't, you are taking a very different path than the one your father wanted to walk down. And seemingly everything that Blackbeard has done in his life, especially the murder of Thatch, goes against everything that Rocks stood for. As I'm recording this, I'm not sure if we should still be calling him Rocks actually, but because this chapter is a little bit more convoluted than most, there's so much going on, I'm gonna have to do this chronologically, so we will get to the name. But something I feel like I need to highlight before moving on is Gloriosa's reaction to Shaki's kidnapping. It is heartbreaking. This is a full-on Oda cry face, and I despise how Oda's decided to pair this despair with the smugness of Ochoku counting his monies. And we've also got all of the citizens of Hachinosu on their knees crying like the citizens of Alabasta did after they heard about the death of King Cobra. Ochoku has been quite the prick. And honestly, the only thing saving me from punching my screen seeing this stupid face is the knowledge that almost 4 decades down the line, Blackbeard would get his revenge and defeat, possibly even killing Ochoku during the Rocky Port incident. I hate saying numbers like that though, because I just cannot believe that this dildo got away with this for 40 years. And somehow he is still far from the worst person in this chapter. And also, Ochoku's nefarious involvement here is probably far from done, because he was a proper magician during this incident. There was no trace of the crime, no suspicion of him whatsoever, and Ochoku is still hanging out with the Rocks Pirates to the day of the God Valley incident. So it could actually be Ochoku, who sparks the downfall of Roxy Zebekia, betraying him like our squad briefly betrayed Whitebeard. But for now, apparently Shaki's disappearance, this is madness, but it was so devastating that it halted the global economy for several weeks, as if Shaki is the One Piece world equivalent of the Suez Canal. And I guess that Shaki's disappearance just left so many people feeling depressed and empty that most of the world stopped working. There was this global wave of grief. And it may legitimately have been the world's worst moment of despair since the Void Century. Shaki's disappearance was like the opposite of the dawn of the world. It was the dusk. And I do wonder, because we know that everything turns out just fine, but this feels like a good opportunity to disappear, to just go away and become the Shaki that we know today. Because the God Valley incident, as far as we know, was never published anywhere, so the general public wouldn't have even known that Shaki was there. And she may have used that lack of knowledge as a chance to fade into obscurity, because Shaki's fame seems to bring nothing but problems. She's hunted wherever she goes, whether it be by pirates or the world government, and without the Rocks Pirates to maintain order around her, I wouldn't blame Shaki for thinking that, yeah, perhaps it is time for the legend of Idol Shaki to be laid to rest. A much more peaceful ending for her than the citizens of God Valley, particularly Shanks and Shamrock's mother. Alright, let's get to this. In this chapter, Saint Bigeland Garling really proved himself as a holy knight by sadistically toying with the mother of his twin children. And Garling, he just fits in so perfectly with the theme of the Holy Knights. On Elbaf right now, their whole deal, mostly represented through Saint Summers, is that the Holy Knights do not understand the concept of love, and they view it as a glaring weakness of humanity. The fact that the Holy Knights do not feel it makes them superior. So in order to entertain themselves, the Holy Knights like to construct these convoluted games games designed to exploit love in brutal, heartbreaking, but therefore hilarious ways. And this is exactly what Garling did as well. I was actually having this discussion with Arta from the Library of O'Hara on Twitter, who was convinced that Garling had word I can't say on YouTube Shanks's mother, which I disagreed with, not because it's crossing Garling's moral line, whatever that happens to be if it exists, but more so because such a straightforward and blunt approach would bore him. It is boring. And it's so much more in line for Garling to make this woman believe that she is loved for 2 whole years before betraying her, stabbing her, and abducting her children. We don't see Shanks's mother's face in this chapter, nor do we see Blackbeard's mother's face, actually. And I'm not sure that we ever will see either of them. But Garling saw her face, and my bet is that the expression she was making was one of the deepest betrayal. A kind of pain that I don't think words are sufficient to describe, because forget the fatal stab wound. The pain that hurts by far the most here is the mental anguish of having everything you thought to be and hold as true crumble around you in an instant. And that, to Figeland Garling, is infinitely more satisfying than just storming in and taking whatever he wants, as more typical world nobles would do. This man, he is on a different level. And I've always known that Garling was going to be one of the most twisted One Piece characters we've ever had to face, just through the nature of his position. Dude is an Elder Star now, so there is a very high standard of humanity that he has to be lacking to get there. But to make everything so much worse, he tells this dying woman who loved him that he already has another, more suitable wife lined up, which turns out to be Shaki, who Garling plans to win as a prize in the native hunting contest. Now, what Garling says here seems to differ between translations, but the general vibe is that he's referring to Shaki as a luxury product that he's ordered from the wife store. He doesn't say wife store, I added that part, but that's what it sounds like. And that would be another great reason for Shaki to disappear after God Valley, because Garling doesn't seem like the kind of man who would settle for second best if he knew that there was something better and more fitting out there. And with that, I must apologize to everyone who proposed the Shaki is Shanks' mother theory, because it almost kind of came true. If everything had gone according to Garling's plan, then Shaki would have been Shanks' stepmother. And I have to say, amongst all of this pain and suffering, I do love this panel of Shanks and Shamrock together. And I think there's something kind of funny about Shamrock raising 2 arms while Shanks is only raising 1 arm. It's almost like a commentary on their current arm status. They look very similar in this panel though. In the last chapter, they had quite a clear emotional difference. And this may go to show that should things have turned out differently, and say Shamrock was found by Roger, then he could have turned out to be a great guy who gave a hat to Luffy, while Shanks could have become thoroughly indoctrinated by the world noble lifestyle. I think the idea behind this panel is that no one is born inherently good or evil, and that both of these babies are blank canvases that turn out to be such different artworks. However, if you would like to experience a lifestyle of, just sitting there and being served for an hour or 2, then I would highly recommend checking out the Calm Belt, which is a channel currently undertaking the project of re-editing the Grand Line Review video library into themed compilations. Very long videos perfect for your very long form activities like driving, drawing, gaming, sleeping, whatever it is you do for extended periods of time, we've got you covered for as long as it takes, with no need to pause what you're doing and pick a new video every 15 minutes or so. They're not just compilations either, because throughout the years there have been what I refer to as lost videos. And these are Grand Line Review projects that were fully written, recorded, and edited. However, for various different reasons, were never published. I'm not going to tell you where they are, how many there are, or even what they are though, because that's not really in the spirit of One Piece, is it? My videos, they're yours if you want them. I left everything I own in the link in the description. So if this new long form channel meets your needs, then please do check it out and make sure to subscribe, because that is insanely important for small channels, and I look forward to seeing you there. But for now, let's get back to you, me. Thanks, me. Moving on though, I am so glad we got to see this. After so much speculation, we have Monkey D. Dragon, a Marine, a recruit, or a cadet. 38 years ago, he was present for God Valley. This is something I've suspected for quite some time now and definitely hoped would be the case. And Dragon steps into this chapter looking pretty amazing. He is 17 years old here, which is the same age that Luffy was when he began his journey. And this is the most like Luffy that Dragon has ever looked. And with the rather dramatic eyeliner, Dragon is very strongly evoking the aesthetics of Snake Man Luffy. But Mr. Dragon here is asking far too many questions. One of those questions being, why are we shooting and or gassing civilians? And his superior officer, mate, he does not appreciate that at all. As a young Marineman, it is Dragon's job to follow orders unquestioningly. And look, I get that. I do think it's important in a military structure for recruits to default to the chain of command or everything just falls apart. But then again, in a situation like this, where you are doing something so obviously counter to the purpose you believe you served, I'm not sure if I should, but I find it a bit surprising that Dragon is the only Marine even daring enough to conjure a question mark in a thought bubble above his head. I guess it goes to show that with the more experienced Marines, what they're doing here isn't even out of the ordinary, which is horrifying in and of itself. And this obviously takes place before Dragon got his face tattoo. But if you do look carefully, you'll still notice that exact pattern on him. At first, I thought this was an armband, and you know what? Maybe it still is. Kind of like what Dragon was wearing on his leg during that short Vegapunk flashback on Ohara. However, Dragon is wearing short sleeves, so this does appear to be an actual tattoo on his arm. Whatever it is, Oda is once again emphasizing that this symbol is extremely important to Dragon, and there's probably a very good reason why he decided to have his face slathered with it. It won't be because of God Valley though, because Dragon meeting Vegapunk on Ohara didn't happen until 16 years after the God Valley incident, so outside and far away from all of this, we still probably have a much deeper personal tragedy incoming for Dragon that drives him to get that tattoo. However, that is a story for another flashback. Dragon's main story in this flashback appears to be that he discovers Shanks' dying mother, although I have seen some people confuse this for Teach's mother, which is understandable because Toddler Teach is featured in the very next panel, but it's definitely Shanks' mother, because it looks like she's either crawled into the building or been dumped here by Garling. There's a trail of blood leading to her rapidly depleting of life body, and despite the immense tragedy, something amazing could be happening here. As if Dragon honors this woman's words and is responsible for getting at least Shanks to safety or plays a part in it, then that would mean that Dragon is the reason why Luffy had his mentor and became the man he is today. It is a case of very indirect parenting, but it looks like Dragon has had a much bigger role in Luffy's life than he previously got credit for. And as if Oda didn't make this chapter tragic enough already, we are also briefly shown a scene of the slaves, I guess, the rabbits for the contest being brought into God Valley. I did love seeing Ginny again, her loss, it still feels a bit fresh to me, which I guess is thanks to the anime because we only just got past the Kuma flashback there, but it is so great to see this happy face again. Child Ginny was so much like Luffy and was a much needed source of light prior to the birth of the Sun God. But one of my favorite parts of this chapter by far is the appearance of this doofus. Big News Morgans, or actually just Morgans, sporting the news fashion of 38 years ago, and in case you didn't notice, you must see this. Big News Morgans is also flanked by two news coups from 38 years ago, and apparently they all wore smart looking hats like men used to do back in ye olde days. I'm very surprised to see Morgans here for a couple of reasons. One is that you would have thought that he would have been too young to be reporting on this event. Morgans is only 15 years old at this point in time, but he has appointed himself the president of the World Economic Journal, a very, very bold title, both job and newspaper, because I love that during this time, Morgans was just running a fledgling localish newspaper. He ran a small business, which Morgans was able to build through a unique talent to gather information as well as to extort bodies like the world government. And just how bold is it for a 15-year-old bird with 2 employees to extort Cypherpol? Morgans, he is such an interesting dude because it looks like he came from nothing, and today he almost has a monopoly on global communications. I must know more about the bird. However, his success is because even in these early days, Morgans was determined to tell the greatest story in the world, and regardless of whether the world government paid him off, he was going to leak this information to Hachinosu simply to start one of the greatest conflicts that we have seen in modern times. So, to clarify, Ginny aboard the slave ship sent out a general communication revealing the God Valley prizes, and that communication, it was picked up by Cypherpol but also by Morgans, who both Ginny and Ivankov appear to know about. They seem to refer to him as an informant. Although different translations say different things, so I'm going to wait on that. But it was Morgans who then fed Ginny's information to Hachinosu, and it was that information, I believe, that spread to Roger. And without his desire for the dramatic, Ginny's effort would have amounted to nothing. So we do have to thank our big bird friend here, because he does spend half of our time helping us, even if the other half is spent hindering us. And so, as we know, everyone is now converged onto God Valley with the aim to save Shaki. Except for two things. First up, the Rocks pirates are intercepted by King Harold, the guy who this flashback was originally meant to be about, and they do some diplomacy. Rocks and Harold, they sit down and drink together, which is quite reminiscent of Roger and Whitebeard drinking together that one last time, which is also where Roger revealed the secret behind his name. And so here Rocks decides to drop the bombshell of the year, which is that his name is not Rocks D. Zebek. It is actually Davy D. Zebek, which I suppose makes Marshall D. Teach actually Davy D. Teach, and they are both direct descendants of Davy Jones. Although it turns out that the narrator lied to us about that name as well, because Davy Jones is actually Davy D. Jones, David Jones, David Jones. My grandmother used to work in one of those, which I guess cans the idea that the D in the Will of D stood for Davy, because then his name would just be Davy Jones. But the Davy clan, they're particularly taboo amongst even those wielding the massive D. The world government are more than happy to entertain monkeys and jaguars in their system, but the name Davy is something so purge-worthy that up until the end of this chapter, nobody even knew that any of them still existed. And Rocks, he has such a devastating line during this conversation, though this really hit me, where he says that it doesn't feel like luck is on his side anymore, and it feels like fate has now taken full control of his life. That makes me very sad, because this is what eventually happens with the Will of D. Luck fuels the D clan members throughout their entire lives until it is time to fulfill their ultimate purpose. Then suddenly luck runs out and fate takes them into the next life in the most poetic of ways possible. And in this case, such poetry is that Rocks' home island, coincidentally, happens to be God Valley, which is where his wife and child are currently being held as super rare rabbits for the hunting contest. And we even see Tiny Teach on the last page of this chapter. And with a childhood like this, mate, it's got to be difficult not to grow up to become the villain. Bartholomew Kuma managed to do it, but no one else is him. So all of the Rocks pirates now think that they are going to God Valley to rescue Shaki, which also that. But Rocks is secretly using this as an excuse so that he can go and save his family, and he knows that this is going to be his last stand. That's the impression I get from his words. And just on that, it is almost certainly Teach and his mother who Garling was speaking about in the previous chapter. The discovery that Emu would be pleased with, not Uranus or anything. As at the end of this chapter, our world noble master of ceremonies announces that they have more super rare rabbits in addition to the Buccaneer Bartholomew Kuma, and after, get this, 800 years, they have uncovered more members of the Davy clan. So the world government haven't officially encountered any Davies since the Void Century ended, meaning that this entire clan was supposedly wiped out. And something I didn't notice at first is that Oda appears to have retconned part of the God Valley incident that we saw in chapter 1096. You may remember that the God Valley native hunting contest rather iconically featured 6 prize chests to be awarded to those who win the most points, with 2 of those chests including Kuma's future devil fruit and Kaido's future devil fruit. Well, imagine my surprise when I was re-examining the chests in this chapter, only to discover that there are now 9 chests, and many of them also have different unique designs, as opposed to the uniform chest design that we saw in Kuma's flashback. Now, I'm not pointing this out to be nitpicky and go, oh, inconsistency, bad storytelling, story man. Not at all. I'm pointing this out because this is exciting. It means that Oda has gone back, thought about this, and decided that 6 chests was not enough for whatever it is that he wants to do, and that we actually needed 9 prizes, with Shaki of course acting as the ultimate 10th prize. And again, we know what 2 of these prizes are, but that means that there are now 7 mystery prizes remaining, all of which have the potential to be something as mind-blowing as Kaido's devil fruit. And I do wonder how many of the fruits in these chests that Big Mom managed to scoop up. When she heard about the prizes in this chapter, her first thought was about feeding them to her kids. So within these chests may be the devil fruits of Charlotte Perospero, Katakuri, Daifuku Oven, and who knows how many more. But I'm looking at this chapter, right? And it is real difficult not to come to the conclusion that Rox was the good guy all along. And with that belief, it becomes even harder to see Roger defeating him here, or for that matter, clashing with Rox at all. Why would he do it? Rox and Roger have essentially a shared interest on this island. They're both here to rescue Shaki, and Rox is also here to rescue some extra someones as well. I don't think that should offend Roger. So just how does this event turn into everybody ganging up on Rox? And I'm starting to feel like it could be that the Rox Pirates do not talk about their time with this crew, not because it was awful and they hated every second of it, but because they treasured it, and the end of this crew was just far too tragic to want to remember. It is a wound that they do not want to reopen. Because that's what's happening here. Rox isn't going into this as some supervillain threatening to destroy the planet. He's going in as a concerned father. A concerned father whose luck has run out, and all that's left is for the Will of D to do what Will of D does best, and for Rox to go out with a smile on his face on the island that he was born, just as Roger would go on to do a couple of decades after him.